Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar organized by IPI on building an agile medtech business in the new normal. My name is Lynn, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this webinar. We hope that you'll be able to gain some insights from our speakers and generate some new ideas to fuel your business growth out of the current new norm. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. As all attendees will be muted throughout the session, if you have any questions for the speakers during the webinar, please make use of the Q&A tab found on your screen to submit your questions. And please note that this webinar will be recorded. A link of the video recording will be shared with all registered participants over email after the webinar. Let me now hand the time over to our moderator, Mr. Wong Lap Wai, CEO of IPI, to commence the panel session. Mr. Wong, please.
Thank you, Lynn, and good afternoon, everyone. For those who are new to IPI, let me first give you a short introduction of IPI. IPI is a wholly owned subsidiary of Enterprise Singapore. Our mission is to enable enterprise to grow the business through technology and innovation. One of our value proposition is technology intermediary. We have a team of experienced technology managers who have domain knowledge in the respective sectors to match tech seekers with tech providers. Basically, the tech seekers are the enterprises with problem statements, or you may call it pain points. Tech providers are tech partners from our global technology network. We do conduct technology landscape study and technology scouting when companies require such services. I'm proud to highlight that we have successfully facilitated more than 200 matches so far, out of which nearly 1/4 is in the health and medtech sector. Now, besides technology intermediary, we also started the Innovation Advisors program in end of 2019 because we saw that many SMEs and startups need support in the innovation journey. The program comprises a team of industry veterans who are conversant in both technology and business. They advise companies in their end-to-end innovation process to develop products or services from ideation to go-to-market. We are grateful that 3 of our MedTech Innovation Advisors are with us as panelists for this webinar. Although all the 3 are experienced veterans from the same sector, they will cover different topics for a more holistic discussion this afternoon. I shall introduce them one by one. First person, Mr. Alok Mishra. Welcome, Ms. Alok. Alok is the CEO of Value Addition, focuses on helping medtech companies build capabilities in strategy and marketing. Formerly with Johnson & Johnson, he has held various senior management positions in marketing and business development across Asia. He will start with the macro view on how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted the industry and how we should thrive in the new normal. Next speaker is Mr. John Teo. He's an inventor with 3 patents and a technopreneur himself. He has over 30 years of experience in R&D, product transfer, and business management. He held numerous leadership roles with startups, small and large enterprises in various industries, ranging from medical to fast-moving consumer goods in Singapore and overseas. He founded 2 medtech companies, Surgilance Private Limited and Medical Innovations Private Limited, which were subsequently sold to a listed company. Naturally, because of his background, he will focus on starting new businesses, supply chain management, quality, and regulatory strategies. Last but not least, Professor Ignatius Rasia. He is currently the program director at the Institute of Engineering Leadership in NUS. He also holds a joint appointment as a professor at the Yonglulin School of Medicine in NUS. He's a faculty advisor for the Medical Grand Challenge at the Center for Innovation in Healthcare at NUHS. He was formerly the VP for Breakthrough Research at Medtronic. Because of his technology background and MNC experience, he will talk about MedTech innovations in a post-COVID era. Now, before I invite the panelists to speak, I would like to conduct a poll with the audience. You should see the poll question on your screen. Yep. And you will have about 10 seconds to answer. We will review the poll result later on for our panel discussion. Okay, thank you very much for all of you who have answered the poll question. Now, without further ado, I shall invite each speaker to give a 5-minute presentation, starting with Alok, followed by John and Ignatius. Alok, over to you.
Thanks, Lopbhai, and good afternoon, everyone. So today's topic is around building an agile medtech business in the new normal. And of course, some people call it the new normal, others call it the new abnormal, because it seems like this is going to be there for some time for us. So what I'd like to do is maybe divide my talk into 2 parts. One, look at the new normal and what are the shifts we see because of COVID in the marketplace. And then secondly, see what might we need to do to respond to this in an agile way. Now, there is an impact on 4 different areas. So starting with the customer shifts, on the top right-hand corner. The first thing which we see is that there's a sudden change in what the hospitals were doing. There were doctors who were performing neurosurgery, cardiac surgery, vascular surgery. Suddenly everyone becomes an infection control doctor or a public health specialist. So there's a massive change, and the surgical procedures which were bringing a lot of value to patients and a lot of money to the hospitals have changed. So this is one big shift we see, and the whole focus has gone into protecting patients, protecting doctors. And the key thing which we see, and this you find this changing a lot between geographies and states and companies and countries, that if there is a lot of patients coming in who have COVID, then your capacity to do any other thing goes down. So there's this sort of seesaw between your ability to do elective surgery and other surgery versus how many patients you need to take care and how many beds you need for that. And that is quite a critical thing, and it keeps going up in waves. And so it's quite a challenging thing. And this is a challenge not just for patients, but also for doctors and hospital administrators. And corresponding to this is the deep impact on financials. No one knows who's going to pay for it. Are patients going to pay for these tests? The surgeries have stopped coming in. So what is going to happen to the money? You still have your nurses and doctors and fixed costs to take care of. So there's a huge stress generated in the whole customer universe, as we can see. Along with this, there's a process disruption, because one of the impacts of this has been that all face-to-face interactions start ceasing. So you see supply chain disruptions, largely due to many of the suppliers shutting down, either due to lockdowns or due to financial reasons, and then travel not being possible because of airlines closing down. So that creates another type of issue, that even if you were to stay open, how do you get your supplies? And we've all been through that, where this whole thing about PPEs and masks and ventilators was not available and created a crisis of its own. The other part is this loss of communication channels and access to customers. Now, when we look at ourselves and as we go into the new normal, we have to find new ways of how do we stay connected with our customers, how do we promote our products to them, how do we do professional education, because that is going to be quite challenging if face-to-face is not going to be possible. And this also has led to sudden change in new product launch timelines, forecasts, because clinical trials and a number of those things are not possible. So huge changes on the customer side and the processes. And connected with this, of course, is the financial impact, as I discussed, loss of those bread and butter procedures, which essentially brought in a lot of revenue to the hospitals and even to us. I mean, companies are selling stents or joints or pacemakers. They're all suffering at the moment because those surgeries are not happening to the same extent. Cash flows and receivables are something which we need to watch out, especially as smaller companies and as SMEs. We need to be very careful, because if your money gets locked in a distributor who has the stocks but the procedures have stopped, suddenly you may find yourself with a problem from a cash point of view. And also change in investment climate. Everyone is now shifted to very short-term and more infection control type of investments. And finally, the organizational challenges. We have people who suddenly don't know what to do. Most of our investments are in sales forces, and they are sitting at home, not being able to connect with customers as much. The ability of our ability to sustain running costs is a challenge. And this overall impact on morale and energy, especially for the new joinees. You see people coming into the organization and they're not able to connect with us and feel what is the customer like, what is the organization like. So it creates a very different scenario. And of course, all of us being in it understand this quite well. So let's see what we might like to do in this from a response point of view. If we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So again, going from customers to people, first thing we have to do is we have to prioritize this. And this requires a lot of active sensing of the market. Which surgical specialties are opening up? And you'll find that the urgent and high value procedures will be the first to come. So cardiac surgery, structural heart, neurosurgery, and there is some evidence that this has started opening up in New Zealand and Australia. Of course, Australia has gone back again. But you find that those procedures will come up and we have to see that you need to start servicing them. The other thing, which is maybe a little counterintuitive, but this is the time when the customers are under a lot of stress. So they need our help, and trying to help them. It may not do with our product, but even getting them masks or PPEs, or even providing some sort of support. In some countries, it has even been getting them food and things. Is very important, because this is where you will create that connection beyond your product. And remember, customers have long memories, and this may be an opportunity for us to do some good work at the same time, build equity for ourselves. And finally, we have to stay in business, so carefully track liquidity and solvency of customers as well as distributors, and make sure that we make decisions which are judicious and not take risks just because suddenly some demand might come up in the market. Processes are the biggest change we will see. Supply chain strategy will need to be redesigned given the possibility of digital, things like e-commerce. Can we go direct to the customers instead of going through pathways, because travel is disturbed and distributors may not be solvent for very long. Communication channels. Can we start doing e-detailing? How do we get e-conferences to work? Getting very familiar with this platform. We are all on Zoom. How do we do that? So that, because ours is a very touch and feel and demonstration type of business. So we need to be able to conduct that as we go forward when face-to-face is not going to be possible. And again, make sure we reforecast new product launch timelines, and especially inform the customers and KOLs who are involved in that design and clinical trials and other things. Managing money is key. So we have to shift our investment focus to the profitable products. Again, as I said, tracking the procedures and accounts which are where the demand is emerging and servicing them. Very strict watch on receivables and cash flow, especially with distributors if you find issues there. Long-term projects you may need to pause, and the new term which is coming up is nowcasting versus forecasting. We'll have to look at staying alive and doing the best we can. And finally, for a people point of view, first and foremost, of course, ensuring employee and customer safety, seeing how we can redesign the organization around new customer processes, and optimizing human resource costs, but always keeping track of the core competencies. What is it that makes us successful? And making sure you preserve that human resource core and not somehow lose it in the chaos which is going around. And finally, again, a lot of the organizational processes, supervision, performance appraisal, they may need to move to digital platforms versus the face-to-face visit. So a lot of change, but again, each one's situation is quite different. So we need to actively sense what is going on there and then make judicious decisions which keep us in business. So with that, I pass it over to John Teo.
Thanks, Alok. Good afternoon, everybody. Today, I will be speaking on my entrepreneur and startup experience in a medical device environment. I will also be speaking about supply chain strategy and the various country regulatory and quality system requirement. First, entrepreneur and startup. Okay, the first important point that we need to note is that innovation is a constant in this competitive and dynamic environment. Startup must constantly innovate their design, whether new or existing product, in order to stay competitive. Key is that the product must be easily to be used and at an affordable price. Second, empathy in the cornerstone of a successful design project. Understanding your user challenges, pain point, and requirement as if they were your own is crucial to a smart design. Make sure that you test your design with your user to ensure what is the customer wants and not what the inventor wants. Make your design very simple and affordable. Next is to develop a patent strategy. Do not review your invention until your patent is filed. Okay, this is to ensure that people cannot copy your patent or cannot copy your design. Make sure that you get a provision patent to obtain a priority date to ensure that during the period where the patent is not being granted, you have protection against your design. Patent is also very territorial and geographical in nature. Okay, it is very expensive to file patent all over the world. For instance, if you file your patent in the US, okay, the patent is only protected in the US and not in other countries. Like, for instance, China, okay? When you file a patent in the US, it is not protected in China. So you have to do a separate filing. This means for every country that you go, you need to file a patent for that particular country. So in order to not to waste money, excessive money, you should file the patent according to the most lucrative market you think your product will get, okay? And at the same time, it needs to be filed in tandem with the regulatory submission. For instance, if you file in the US, okay, make sure that your product filing for FDA is also in the US concurrently. This is to ensure that the product is protected after you have filed submission for US to get your product approved of use in the US. Number 4, stay vigilant of and beware of the big boys. Okay, big boys, especially for a startup, you do not have a track record. Okay, they do have a lot of financial means to protect themselves. So when your product is selling in the market, they can either block your access to the customer by preventing the customer from not buying your product, and at the same time, they also can file patent infringement to get an injunction to block your sales into that particular market. So big boys, you need to be careful, especially you are a new kid in the block. Next is to seek funding. Identify the funder early in the project. Okay, nowadays you have government, IHL, research institute, and private investor to get fund from. Ensure you have a good business plan and valuation of your company before you seek fund. Lastly is marketing, US marketing channel and segment. US has several channels and segments you should consider based on your product that you have. For instance, distributor to the clinics and hospital, pharmacy change. Second, product bundling. Okay, sometimes your product cannot use a conventional distributor because it is not an item that you can sell easily on its own. Okay, it must be used with a complementary item. So that's why you use a bundling strategy. For instance, if you have a syringe, you can bundle it with a vaccine supplier. Okay, and if you have equipment, okay, you can bundle it together with a software supplier. So that is one strategy that you can do if your product can complement other players' product innovation. And then the last one is private label. Okay, sometimes the distributor or the marketing partner would want to brand their own product using private label. So this is an opportunity that you can get. For instance, like if you go to NUC, they can do a lot of private label on Maggi noodles, soap powder, etc., etc. So this is one way to ensure that your product have a good reach with the current player in the marketplace. The second topic that I want to speak about is SCM strategy for a startup company. Because startup company has no track record and have a lot of unknown. So it is also very difficult for you to partner with the distributor and at the same time your manufacturer. So, and furthermore, there's a lot of unknown. How much quantity you're going to build for this particular product? How are you going to price your product? These are all big question mark for you before you launch your product into the marketplace. So in order to have a strategy, the first thing that you have to do is to understand the market size in terms of dollar, in terms of the unit, and also what is your price point based on the various volume that you intend to buy and sell into the marketplace. Then you can target the market penetration rate for 3 to 5 years. Okay, and after that, you can plan your inventory based on your expected sales and manufacturing volume. Make sure that you work out all the detailed costs because there is a lot of hidden costs in the distribution channel. For instance, when you ship it to the US, your first port of call maybe is in San Francisco. And then this particular container need to be trucked to, say, in the Midwest to Chicago. So there's a trucking cost, okay? And at the same time, there's a regional warehouse cost as well that you need to store before the product goes into the hospital and clinics. So make sure that you work out the final price or the total price it needs to take to reach the end customer. Lastly, you need to optimize your cash flow by negotiating with your distributor and your manufacturer. Because on one hand, you are getting a credit from the manufacturer, and on the other hand, you are trying to get a debit from the distributor. So if the gap is too wide, you can be sitting in a large, what I call inventory cash for about 120 days. And that 120 days, assuming that one container is 30 days, you'll be sitting with about 400,000 worth of cash in your inventory chain. So it's a very significant amount, especially if you are a startup. Lastly, I'd like to talk about quality and regulatory strategy, whether to apply for FDA and CE mark. Make sure that you apply, before that, make sure that you apply using the right classification code, because different market, the US and Europe, they have a different classification code. Make sure that you check and verify that you got the right classification code before you do a product submission. So for the US and Europe, the product certification is also very different. For the US, you have your pre-market approval notification, which is your 510K. And then you have also another classification called a pre-market approval. And for Europe, it's just CE mark, but there are classification, they have 5 risk classifications. So make sure that you know exactly what you're doing before you start filing for your product, and make sure that you get your EN 13465 and your GMP properly set up before you start manufacturing, before you start shipping. So for today, that's all that I have. And now I will hand over to Aloysius.
Thank you very much, John.
Everybody.
Yeah, thank you. So welcome, everyone. Very nice afternoon here today. And let me begin with talking about how this pandemic has hit us. It's disrupted almost everything. If you're not affected, I'll be surprised. It's disrupted, as you heard from Alok, it's disrupted us in so many different ways. And instead of trying to talk through some of the aspects by, I thought I'll use an example using Structo, who have given me permission to use them. You see, Structo is a company that started 7 years ago with a few NUS engineers who had a new technology on 3D printing, really fast 3D printing. They went and looked around for a need and found dental braces as the initial market. And since then, they've stayed in that focused area of dental implants. They grew, they did very well. They are based here in Asia, Europe, and America right now, doing very well. And bam, out of the blue, the pandemic hits them. The pandemic hits them so hard that they needed to, they were shaken up, literally. I mean, China's volume just dropped when Wuhan hit them and the pandemic. And so they had to react. So they then quickly revisited the market and to say, hey, what the heck is happening here? But in so doing, they not only looked at their focus area, they also looked around to what's happening in the market. And then they reviewed that in light of their core capabilities. In so doing, they suddenly found that there was a desperate need for face shields for the healthcare workers. And so now that they have spare capacity under the review, they went into designing and making face shields almost instantly. The one thing that they had that manufacturers didn't have was they could design it and make it there and then. They had all the 3D making equipment. They didn't need to go into making an injection moldable mold and etc. So they started producing the face shields for the healthcare workers. Fantastic. First move. They quickly reacted. They were agile. They were very frugal in the way they did things and got it to the market quickly. But next, as they were doing this, they began to see that testing was a big problem because the swab sticks, the nasopharyngeal swab sticks, which you see in the next slide, was in severe short supply. The suppliers in the US couldn't provide. And so being in the MedTech market, they quickly used, again, all their knowledge. Within 2 months, they designed and got it approved and got it into production. And now they're producing up to 1 million swab sticks per week. And this is now going out into the market. So you can see how these people have started reacting, revisiting their customer need, reviewing, and then realigning themselves. What happened in the process was the business, while they thought was falling away in China, and it was, but America was holding up because after China, Europe was falling apart and the volumes were dropping. And then US started dropping, and the next thing you know, China started going up again because they've recovered. So this wave of change, they had to react even from a business standpoint. And therefore, realignment is not just purely innovation, it's also innovation from a business sense. But in the process of making 1 million swab sticks, as well as continuing their main focus area of braces, they had to hire 300 more employees, and they're doing quite nicely at the moment. So at this point, I talked about how things have happened in the in the short term. Let me also take you to another example where there are a large company which reacted to not just the short term, but also the medium to long-term changes that were happening to them. So for a start, if you look at the pharma companies, they were, in the turn of the century, they were the fully integrated pharma companies. They did everything in-house. They were big, tens of billions of dollars. They did everything all by themselves. But even they struggled when the generic drug manufacturers came in, when they had to design not just small molecules, started going into larger, medium-sized to larger molecules, into biologics, which were slightly out of their area. And guess what? The startups were very nimble. They were turning around solutions much faster, and they had to react. And so began this whole change where pharma companies began to realize they need to move from where they were in both a frugal and agile manner. They started externalizing their R&D, externalizing even in some cases production, and started working towards in licensing technologies and using open source methodologies and open innovation as well. I noticed there was a question on the Q&A about open source, and I'd like to say this. You first need to know what is core to you. And what is core to the pharma companies? Well, you could say, yeah, they were drugs and so on, but actually it was the distribution channel, the access to market. They had it all locked in. So now they can have a pipeline of products coming in, and that wasn't necessarily core to them anymore. So they've now moved towards becoming virtual pharma companies, which are moving towards precision medicine. So in the medium to longer term, they're moving to that virtual company rather than staying as the fully integrated pharma companies. I think I've covered some elements of how one does react. And at this point, I'd like to stop here. Thank you for the opportunity and hand the floor back to Lapwai. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your insightful sharing and your presentation. First of all, I was just informed by my colleague that there is a technical glitch with the webinar platform poll feature, and that therefore we're not able to review the poll result. My sincere apology. So if that's the case, then maybe I should just embark on our panel discussion and then followed by Q&A later on. Now, you can submit your Q&A. For those who have submitted, you know what to do. For those who have not submitted your questions, please make use of the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. For MacBook users, you can find this at the top of your screen. If you would like to address your question to a specific speaker, please indicate the name of the speaker that you are directing your question to. Now, so without further ado, maybe I will shoot off the first question. Perhaps I go to John first. John, you ready?
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Now, you are an inventor in your own right with 3 patents filed under your name. You have also founded and sold 2 MedTech companies. Please share with us the challenges you had encountered and what advice you can offer to our SMEs or startups.
Okay, I think the first problem that I find is when you start off to look for fund, okay, because you do not have good track record, okay, you are unknown to many people. So in order to get investor to believe in you, it is very difficult. So my advice is that before you look for funding, make sure that you develop a good business plan, a good financial model, and try to convince people as much as possible. Especially for angel investor, they want everything and they want a big stake up from the company. So in order not to give out a big stake, to the investor, try and do as much as possible to make sure that your company is complete, in a sense that make sure that you have distributor ready, make sure you have manufacturer standby ready to produce your goods, and make sure that you are in control of the company to convince that they can bet on you. So this is the first challenge that I face. The second is marketing, okay? Because your base is in Singapore, you are trying to sell your goods in the US. So it's either you fly over the US on a constant basis or you live there, okay? So what I did was to make sure that I find a good partner that I can work with. And it's not difficult, although I have experience and I know some of these people, but when you come out and you work on your own, it's very difficult to convince people who do you know that previously you say that you used to work for an MNC, now you work from your own, you also have a reputation at stake. So trying to find a good partner, marketing partner is key and is difficult, but it's also key. The next one is manufacturing, okay? It's same here because when you manufacture, you will incur a lot of money with the manufacturer, and the manufacturer will say that, hey, you have money to pay me, you know. That's the first question they will ask you. And you also have to convince him that you have a good customer waiting to buy your product. And you have to show them how you're going to ramp up and what sort of price that you are willing to pay, or we can manage the cost to a certain level as you ramp up. This means when you ramp up, the price will have to come down to a certain level that you are profitable when you sell your product. So these are the three main challenges I see, especially as a startup.
Thank you, John. My next question goes to Prof. Ignatius. Ignatius, from the MNC perspective, please share with us what MNCs will develop in-house and when will they adopt the open innovation approach to work with external parties? How can our SMEs increase the chances of becoming MNCs strategic partners in product innovation?
Yeah, thanks, Laboy, for this question. Having been one in that same situation in the past, I can tell you from first-hand experience that one of the first things we find ourselves doing is sticking to a lot of what is core to us. We have core capabilities and access to the need, meaning the healthcare clinical need, and we want to keep that in-house as MNCs. But then we also find there are a lot of things developing, and I mean, I can give you several examples where you have things like AI and you know, mobile device-based, cloud-centered IoT type devices, which sometimes are not core to some very hardcore mechanical or electromechanical device type companies. So MNCs tend to keep what is core to them and then partner with others outside. And like I think some of you know, Medtronic has this diabetes feedback loop system, which is cloud-based with mobile devices. This was completely outsourced to a company in Ireland. Now, on the other hand, you talked about open source. Now, there are areas beyond the first wave to the second wave where some stuff are slightly outside in the first instance in terms of technology and timelines, closer to, I wouldn't say blue skies, but slightly nearer kind of the 5-year time frame. Those kind of work we have in some instances outsourced. I'll tell you one instance where in Singapore I did some work in that space. Sutures, very traditional stuff, but packaging of sutures wasn't necessarily a core competency within Medtronic. And so we had a hackathon for local regional companies to come in and try to win that award to do packaging for Medtronic at one point. So these are some examples that I can give you about how open source software, open source innovation, and even IPI has open innovation competitions could be used by multinationals. And it's a great opportunity for startups and SMEs to try to get hooked up into a supply chain that you would then otherwise do not have, as John called it, the big boys. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignatius. In view of the time, perhaps I ask one last question to Alok before we answer those questions coming from the audience. Since earlier on, Prof talked about AI, maybe I should also talk about, pose a question to Alok. I believe, AI is not just a buzzword. It is definitely very relevant to the MedTech industry, particularly on the related to MedTech innovation. Could you please tell us more about the application and potential impact to the industry?
Yeah. So I can offhand think of at least a couple of examples. One of it being the project with my past company, Johnson & Johnson, was involved with Google, where we are looking at robotic surgery. So where you look at technologies which Google has developed in the area of AI and navigation, and combine it to do robotic surgery, but more as a companion to the surgeon. And what it does is it actually makes even less skilled surgeons do a little more complicated surgery than they could, because it helps them to navigate and do things in the proper way. But the other thing which I've seen, and it's actually an example from Singapore, where one of the companies essentially coming out of the biodesign, Stanford and Singapore biodesign process, they've created this startup called BotMD, which has been very useful at the moment in terms of helping the hospitals out. So if you imagine the situation in the hospitals, what happens is there is the surgical part, there is the things involved around the patient, but there's a lot of admin work involved in terms of questions, information, and stuff like that. And it's not in one place. So even if you need to know that, do I have a bed available today for my orthopedics patient? You have to ask a nurse, she will ask someone else, and it's quite a bit of work involved. And this is the time when each minute of the healthcare workers is very, very valuable. So what this company had developed is looking at all the data sources within hospitals. They're able to create an engine, an AI engine, where you query it and it'll give you the answer to many of these type of things. And many of our hospitals, I know that NUHS was using it, and some of the other hospitals found it very useful in this time, because each minute of everyone was quite precious. So having something which doesn't require human intervention to answer the information part of it is very useful. So I personally feel there is a lot of opportunity. And the third one which I can think of is a startup, which again is an NUS startup, which is developing a very interesting technology which uses breath analysis for diagnosing lung cancer. And they're able to do it based on a whole set of data they have created with some of the volatile compounds and stuff. So I think there is a lot of opportunity, and I also feel Singapore is very well placed in it, because our institutions of higher education have very good R&D, and of course Ignatius is here. So I think we're in a great place to use some of these. But I think the key is getting that insight, what will help the customer, because it's not about the technology, it's about the application where we need to look at.
Thanks, Alok. I look at the Q&A tab. There are a couple of questions there, and some of our speakers have already chosen to answer live. Maybe I will start off with John. There are two questions from our audience. Lim Kim Chong, there are two questions. Maybe we can answer both questions together.
Yeah, I think the first one regard.
Yeah, maybe I just quickly say out the question first. First one is, can you file protection for design ideas only as a technology for the product development has no background IP? Second one is, what are the ISO standards for digital stethoscope design and patient data transmission via John, over to you.
Yeah, I answer the second one first because ISO standard, okay, is actually used for general management and it does not apply for medical device or software. So for the software, for medical device, etc., you have to follow the quality system called EN 13485. Okay, and your product need to be CE mark. Okay, so just now I mentioned about getting to check that which area does your product fall into. For this particular case, I think it's a software. So you need to take a look at the software side and see what's your qualification. I think a big question to you is that if I want to ask is that if this software or is this digital stethoscope used in decision making, then it will fall under a medical device. But if it is not, and it's just like an aid where you provide the doctor with the information, then this one fall under a lower specification. So you need to consider whether this software that you are using or this item that you are using is a decision-making process. Okay, so it's something that is a bit ambiguous as far as I'm concerned for this question. Okay, for the second one, for the first question regarding the product file protection for design idea, if the technology can be kept secret, for me it's better to do it as a trade secret. Okay, keep it as a company secret, not to diverge out to a third party. The other thing is that you may want to look at copyright rather than IP, because there is a differentiation for IP. It's more like provided your design has innovative content or creative content or new content, it must be new in the marketplace, then you can file for IP. But if your process is something that is generic, it is like maybe your formulation or your the way you control the temperature is slightly different from other people so that you can get a good end result, then maybe you should take a look at trying to keep it as a trade secret or a copyright rather than an IP.
Okay, thanks, John. There's another question from Timothy. Ignatius, you chose to answer live. Can you please take over the question?
Sorry, this was, you've asked Timothy about medicine as a service, personalized medicine, and what enabling developments need to occur to get there. Okay, now our traditional medicine has been set up in a way where you look into a specific condition, you look at a certain therapy or device, and then you go in for regulatory approval, and then you kind of mass produce. Now, however, now people have, sorry, am I being timed out here? No, okay. So, however, now people are beginning to find you have unique solutions, unique implants that is specific to that individual, or unique drug combinations, etc., which is specific to the person and to the condition, which is called personalized medicines. In the first place, the regulatory framework and the legal frameworks had to adjust. Now, I'll say this, it's already changing, and there are already, I'm talking about like orthopedic implants, there are already places where you can get them, and they are approved, and maybe Alok can jump in to answer this as well. It's not pervasive in all aspects of personalized medicine. Now, there is also, that is the hardware portion, there is also the software part of it, because sometimes software becomes a medical device itself. And so medicine as a service comes with a whole bunch of software. And as John was saying, there are certain guidelines and frameworks that have been set up. First, in the first place, the software has to follow the ISO 27017, 27018 system, besides the ISO 13485 and the ISO 62304, which is specific to software as a medical device. So there are many of these aspects that have been already designed over the last decade. And now we are at the cusp of having many of these services becoming online. Now, I would go back to that Medtronic diabetes example for type 1 diabetes, where they already have feedback loop of a person's sugar level being tested and titrating the sugar while the information is also going up to the cloud and so on. And some of you may have heard of pacemakers, which can have the information to the cloud and so on. So I think I'll stop at this point to say that we are at the cusp, and there are already beginning to have many products coming out in this area. Alok, I don't know whether you had any comments about this.
No, I think I don't have any additional comments other than the fact that being part of HSA, there's a lot of things to be considered from a regulatory point of view. Because when it comes to software, I mean, things around what are the claims you're making, and also what might be issues around cyber security. Like, I think that was one of the concerns when the pacemakers were connected. I think there was a movie also made on that. So there are these areas, and I would suggest, and I know there are a couple of other questions around regulatory, how early should we connect, and what about regulatory filings. I think one of the things I would advise, and I've seen that even with smaller parts of large companies at times, because they operate like startups, that there's this fear of the regulatory authorities. And I think the best thing would be as early as possible to talk to them, and they will be able to give you a lot of good advice as to when you're approaching this, what are the pitfalls and what are the areas which you need to look at. And I know that HSA in Singapore is quite keen to work on innovations. I think that might be something you need to consider. Thanks.
Okay, looking at the time, I think I can still ask two more questions from the floor. These two questions, I would like to direct them to Alok, or perhaps Alok has already chosen to answer. These are business related questions. One is about growth regions. The other one is what will be deprioritized in the near term. Alok, can you answer those two questions together?
Yeah. So they're sort of related. And I think it's a very important question at this stage, because it's a bit like the stock market. Things are changing so fast that if you are not aware of where the ball is, you can miss out an opportunity or end up with a threat. So one of the advice I would have in this stage is that active sensing of the environment, staying connected with customers, key opinion leaders, even on phone and Zoom and things, and also with your salespeople, because they have a lot of information, is quite critical. And the things to look after are as follows. One is whether or not hospitals get back to doing the type of surgery we want them to depends on bed capacity availability. And this depends on the spread of COVID. So there are some markets where, like even the US, it's going through the roof. So it's very challenging for them to come back and start doing elective surgery. But the other places like New Zealand, and I think Singapore is also getting there, where you'll find that bed capacity is available, and therefore you can look at surgery which needs hospitalization. So that is one thing to track. And based on that, there would be some amount of procedure forecasting which can be done. Now, within that, while it's difficult to say which one you should go after, generally speaking, it's a good idea to try to divide these medical procedures in terms of elective and non-elective. And within those also, things which are urgent, which are time sensitive, and which are not time sensitive, right? So for example, the most crucial ones, of course, the first opportunity is in infection control. When it's going through the roof, or the masks and vaccination. I think when vaccination starts globally, I think whoever sells the syringes for vaccination, that will go through the roof, right? So ICUs, ventilators. So that was the main thing, which is a no-brainer. Everyone knows about it. The challenge being, however, it may not be something you want to get into with investment, because this demand may not be very durable. It may go out after some time, so it's more of a temporary demand. So if you have the opportunity, like the example Ignatius gave with 3D printing and all, it might be something you want to get into. But otherwise, when you look at procedures, the non-elective urgent things like orthopedics, the accidents, trauma, spine, OB/GYN, you can't, postpone childbirth and stuff, and some of the urology type of procedures, they will come back because they are, urgent. They have to be done. So those may be the first to come back. And then there will be elective procedures, but which are time sensitive. For example, cardiovascular procedures. You can't postpone a cardiac surgery for very long. You can't postpone an EP procedure for very long. So peripheral vascular. So these will then start coming back. And some of the neuro procedures will be here. And then there are the elective non-time sensitive ones like ophthalmology, aesthetic surgery, dermatology, ENT. These may take time, but having said that, in many cases, these are not done in the main hospital. So they are done as day surgeries, and they're done in specialized clinics. So again, you have to track where things are coming up, and this procedure forecasting is a very important thing to do so that you know where the demand is and what your forecast can look like. So I think, and the other thing broadly which people feel is that actually things will stay low at the moment, but around Q4 of this year, procedures will actually be higher than normal because there's all this pent up demand of elective surgery, people waiting with their knee surgery and things. So it will go up and it will stay like that till about Q2, Q3 of next year. And then maybe by the end of next year, it will come back to what the normal levels were. So next year, you may actually see a lot more procedures than you saw now because many of these cannot be postponed indefinitely. Some point in time, they have to be done. But again, these are broad guidelines. And I think we need to be on top of what procedures there are, and staying connected with the market and moving with it is quite essential.
Thank you, Alok. It's just 5 more minutes to 5 o'clock. It's a pity that we do not have enough time to answer all the questions. We'll try our best to see whether we can reply to you separately. I think it's time for me to wrap up the session. Before I wrap up the session, I would like each panelist to answer the closing question. The question is, what is the one thing that you want our audience today to take away? Maybe I'll start with Ignatius first this time.
Sure, thanks, Labwai. I think you heard the theme right through and through. Alok was talking about active listening, and I was talking about revisit. So I'll put it this way. In the current situation, you need to revisit the need, and the need of the product or the service or whatever you want to do. What is the need? And it may be different from what you were thinking. And you need to review that in line with your capabilities and your current focus and plans and so on. So, and beyond the review, you need to then realign. And all of this realignment with the market needs to be done in a frugal and agile manner. And that's my takeaway.
John?
Mine will be innovation is a constant for business sustainability. And the reason why I say that is that if you have a good design, okay, there will be a marketplace for you.
Thank you.
That's all. Yeah.
Thanks, Alok.
Yeah. So my takeaway or advice would be that because things are changing so fast, very active environmental sensing and listening to the market, especially customers and the marketplace, is very important. And then combine that with prudent risk taking. We don't build things for demand which may not be durable. So take risks where required, but be prudent. And last but not the least, speed of action is very important. You have to move fast because this opportunity is not going to last.
Thank you, Alok. Let me do to wrap up. First and foremost, I would like to thank our audience. Thank you very much for your active participation by asking the pertinent questions. To my speakers, thank you very much for your insightful sharing and the key takeaways. Alok shared with us how the COVID-19 crisis has impacted the MedTech industry. At the same time, he also presented the opportunities and how we can thrive in a new normal. Now, one thing for sure, even if vaccines or new drugs are developed for the COVID-19 virus are found, we do not foresee life will revert to the pre-COVID situation, or at least not within the next few years. Business must not continue as usual. One must relook at the end-to-end value chain to refocus, redesign, and reinvent. Both John and Ignatius had shared their experiences in starting new business and looking at MedTech innovation in a post-COVID era in 3 different time frames, i.e. for survival in the short term, be resilient in the medium term, and sustainable for the long term. So in summary, business must pivot. Innovation is the only way for growth. So my one takeaway for the audience, think innovation, think of IPI and our team of diverse and experienced innovation advisors who can support your business. I shall now hand over the session back to Lynn for the webinar closing. Thank you very much to all of you for your attention.
Yeah, thank you, Lap Wai, and a very big thank you to all our speakers and to Lap Wai as well for the very enriching and inspiring session. And if there are any questions that you have submitted but yet to be answered, the IPI team will follow up with you after the webinar. And if your question was sent anonymously, do get in touch with you separately in this case. And we've now come to the end of today's event. I'd like to invite you to fill up a post-webinar survey through the link displayed in the chat box to give your feedback. Alternatively, you can click on the button to redirect you to the survey upon your exit of the webinar. And if you would like a free consultation with IPI to discuss about your innovation needs or find out more about the Innovation Advisors Program, please also indicate your interest in the form. Thank you for your great participation today, and we look forward to having you again in our next webinars. Bye for now.
Thank you.